The rain drummed against the office windows with the persistence of an actor who'd been waiting 3 hours past their appointment time. I set down my coffee, now cold, and looked across the casting room where I'd spent the better part of 15 years making decisions that could change lives or break dreams, often within the span of a single audition. The desk lamp cast its familiar yellow glow across stacks of headshots, each one a story of ambition, each one marked with my pencil notations. Maybe. No. Call back. Not this time. My hands, weathered by years of turning pages and making marks, showed the fatigue of another long day in a business where hope met reality in rooms just like this one. Subscribe to witness the untold moments where careers hang in the balance and discover how the greatest performances often happen when no one's watching. People think casting is about finding the best actor for the role, and in an ideal world, perhaps it would be. But casting, real casting, exists in the messy intersection of talent, timing, budget constraints, and that indefinable quality we call fit. I've watched magnificent actors deliver career-defining auditions only to hear the director whisper, "He's too tall for the leading lady," or "She doesn't look like someone's daughter," or the most crushing of all, "He's just not what we pictured." The math is brutal and rarely fair. For every role, we might see 200 actors. One gets chosen. 199 go home with nothing but the hope that tomorrow might be different. I've learned to live with this arithmetic of dreams deferred, but it never gets easier to be the messenger of disappointment. The business teaches you to develop armor, to make decisions quickly, and move on to the next appointment. But every casting director carries a mental file of the ones who got away. Actors whose presence lingered long after they left the room, whose performances haunted you during the drive home, whose no felt like a mistake even as you wrote it down. These ghosts of missed opportunities accumulate over the years, creating a weight that settles in your chest during the quiet moments between auditions. You learn to recognize the difference between good actors and great ones, between those who perform their lines and those who inhabit them so completely that the character seems to exist independent of the script. What happened that Thursday afternoon in October would have seemed unremarkable to anyone watching through the casting room's small window. Another actor arriving for another audition, following the same routine that played out dozens of times each week. But presence is something that can't be captured on security cameras or described adequately in casting notes. It's the way someone enters a room, not with fanfare or theatrical gestures, but with a quality of attention that shifts the very molecules of air around them. It's the difference between someone who is performing confidence and someone who simply contains it, like a deep well that never announces its depth. I was reviewing notes from the morning sessions when my assistant knocked and announced the 3:47 appointment. The door opened with the soft sound it always made, that slight squeak of hinges that needed oil, but something in the atmosphere changed immediately. The man who entered moved with a deliberation that spoke of someone who had learned, perhaps through years of waiting, that rushing accomplishes nothing. He wasn't young, certainly not by industry standards where 35 is often considered over the hill. But he carried his years like a musician carries a well-worn instrument, with respect for what time had taught him. He took his position in front of the folding chair we used as a mark, not with the eager positioning of someone trying to find their light, but with the settled certainty of someone who understood that the work was internal, that whatever he needed to accomplish would happen regardless of stage management. When I handed him the sides, a single page with perhaps 6 lines of dialogue from a courtroom drama, he read through them once, silently, his lips barely moving. Most actors read sides multiple times, asking questions about motivation or backstory, seeking clues about how to approach the material. He simply absorbed it, like a stone accepting water. The scene itself was nothing remarkable. A defendant's father addressing the court before sentencing, a moment that required dignity in the face of disappointment, the ability to convey years of accumulated wisdom and sorrow in just a few sentences. I'd heard these lines delivered dozens of times that week, watched actors reach for gravitas and fall short, seen them push for emotion and achieve only volume. But when he spoke, something extraordinary happened in the ordinariness of the moment. "Your Honor," he began, and immediately the room felt different. Not because he'd raised his voice or altered his posture, but because his words seemed to carry the weight of lived experience. There was no performance in it, no indication that he was pretending to be someone else. He had somehow located the essential truth of a father watching his son face consequences, and he spoke from that place with such quiet authority that I found myself leaning forward despite myself. The lines about forgiveness and second chances, which had sounded like mere legal rhetoric when other actors delivered them, suddenly seemed to contain depths of meaning I hadn't noticed before. When he finished, the room held its silence longer than usual. Not the awkward pause of an audition gone wrong, but the kind of quiet that follows genuine revelation, when something has been witnessed rather than merely performed. I glanced at my notes, realizing I'd forgotten to write anything during his reading, so completely had I been drawn into what he was creating. This was the moment every casting director lives for, when an actor transcends the material and shows you not just what they can do, but who they are at their core. But even as I recognized the exceptional quality of what I'd just witnessed, I knew the mathematics of the situation. The role was written for someone 15 years younger. The director had specifically requested fresh faces. The budget didn't allow for anyone with significant experience, which this man clearly possessed, even if I couldn't place where I might have seen his work. The producer had been explicit about wanting unknown actors who would be grateful for the opportunity and willing to work for the minimum allowed by union regulations. These were the practical realities that governed my world, the constraints within which even the most inspired casting choices had to exist. I could already hear the conversations that would follow if I recommended him, about insurance costs for older actors, about marketing campaigns built around youth, about the demographic profiles that drove financing decisions. None of these considerations had anything to do with his undeniable talent, but all of them would determine whether his name went forward to the next round of consideration. I set down my pen and looked across at him, this man who had just demonstrated the kind of natural authority that can't be taught in acting classes or developed through years of technique work. He waited without fidgeting, his hands relaxed in his lap, displaying none of the nervous energy that usually filled the space after an audition ended. There was patience in his stillness, the quality of someone who had learned that desperate grasping changes nothing, that the work speaks for itself, or it doesn't speak at all. "Thank you," I said, the words feeling inadequate for what had just transpired. That was very strong work." He nodded, a slight acknowledgement that contained neither pride nor disappointment, simply acceptance of the feedback offered. I wanted to say more, to tell him that in 15 years of casting, I'd rarely seen presence like his, that he'd transformed a routine audition into something approaching art. But the professional boundaries that governed these interactions prevented such personal revelations, maintained the necessary distance between the evaluator and the evaluated. As he gathered his things, just a worn leather portfolio containing his headshot and resume, I found myself memorizing details about him that I knew I'd want to remember later. The way he'd worn his jacket, not expensive, but perfectly fitted, suggesting attention to presentation without vanity. The silver at his temples that spoke of experience earned, rather than age endured. The quality of his handshake when he thanked me for my time, firm but not aggressive, respectful but not deferential. After the door closed and his footsteps faded down the hallway, I sat in the quiet of the casting room with the stack of headshots and my daily log of appointments. The rain had stopped without my noticing, leaving only the occasional drop from the eaves to mark the passage of time. I opened my private notebook, the one I kept separate from official casting reports, where I recorded impressions that might not fit into agency-friendly language, but that I needed to preserve for my own understanding of what I'd witnessed. October 17th, 3:47 appointment, I wrote. Exceptional presence. Natural authority. Voice quality remarkable. Not performance, just truth. I paused, searching for words that might capture what had made those few minutes different from the dozens of auditions that preceded and would follow them. This man will work consistently once the right doors open. Not a question of if, but when. Someone to remember when the timing aligns with the talent. I closed the notebook and filed it in my desk drawer, next to years of similar observations about actors who had impressed me despite not fitting the immediate needs of whatever project brought them to my attention. Some of those early entries had been vindicated by later success. Actors whose names I'd kept track of as they moved through the industry's complicated geography of opportunity and recognition. Others remained mysteries, talented people who had perhaps chosen different paths, or never found the specific confluence of role and timing that transforms capability into career. The business side of casting rarely accounts for the human moments that make the work meaningful. Budget meetings don't include line items for the cost of passing on exceptional talent, because it doesn't fit demographic profiles determined by marketing research. Production schedules don't pause to accommodate the reality that some performances contain depths that might take time to recognize fully. The machinery of film and television production requires efficiency, predictability, choices that can be justified to investors who understand profit margins better than they understand the subtle differences between adequate and transcendent. I've sat through countless meetings where directors describe their vision for a character, only to watch that vision constrain itself around commercial considerations that had nothing to do with storytelling. "We need someone who can open a movie overseas," they'd say. Or, "The network wants someone with network, wants someone already known," reducing the complex art of character creation to algorithms and demographic studies. These weren't artistic decisions as much as business calculations, and while I understood their necessity, I also understood what got lost in the translation between creative vision and commercial reality. But in the private moments after auditions like the one I'd just witnessed, when the mathematical constraints of the industry seemed particularly arbitrary, I'd find myself wondering about alternate realities, where talent alone determined outcomes, where the man who had just left my office would get called back not because he fit a predetermined mold, but because he demonstrated something rare and valuable that any reasonable person could recognize, where the quiet authority in his voice would be seen as an asset rather than a complication, where his years of accumulated experience would be valued rather than viewed as an obstacle to marketing strategies built around youth. The industry teaches you to think in terms of immediate fits and current projects, but casting is also about recognizing potential that might not align with present circumstances. Every experienced casting director develops an instinct for identifying actors who might not be right for today's role, but who possess qualities that will eventually find their proper showcase. It's a form of professional intuition that comes from years of watching how careers develop, how certain types of talent mature into opportunities that didn't exist when you first encountered them. I'd learned to trust this instinct, even when it couldn't be quantified in official reports or justified in budget meetings. Some actors carry within them the seeds of performances that won't bloom until they encounter the right material, the right director, the right moment in cultural history, when what they have to offer becomes exactly what audiences need. Recognizing this potential requires looking beyond immediate circumstances to envision future possibilities, to see not just who an actor is today, but who they might become given the proper opportunities to grow. As the afternoon moved toward evening and the casting room emptied of its accumulated energy from the day's sessions, I found myself returning to the moment when that quiet authority had filled the space with something approaching magic. Not theatrical magic, but the more subtle transformation that occurs when genuine human experience becomes the foundation for artistic expression. He'd taken those few lines about forgiveness and consequence and somehow infused them with the weight of actual wisdom, as if he'd lived through similar moments and could draw upon that lived knowledge to inform his interpretation. This is what separates memorable auditions from merely competent ones. The sense that an actor isn't just reading words, but channeling some deeper understanding of human nature. It's the difference between someone who can hit their marks and deliver lines convincingly, and someone who can locate the emotional truth underneath those lines and speak from that place of genuine recognition. The former is craft, which can be learned and perfected through diligent practice. The latter is artistry, which emerges from the intersection of technical skill and life experience, and which cannot be manufactured or imitated successfully. The entertainment industry operates on cycles that can take years or even decades to complete. Actors who seem perfectly suited for current trends might find themselves unemployable when cultural tastes shift, while others who appeared too unusual or challenging for contemporary audiences sometimes discover that the world has evolved to meet their particular gifts. Understanding these longer rhythms requires patience and the ability to see beyond immediate circumstances to broader patterns of change and development. I've watched actors struggle for years before finding roles that utilize their specific combination of abilities, and I've seen others achieve early success, only to discover that their initial advantages couldn't sustain them through the inevitable shifts in public taste and industry priorities. The actors who maintain long careers usually possess some quality that transcends temporary trends. A fundamental truthfulness, perhaps, or an ability to find fresh approaches to familiar material, or simply the kind of presence that makes audiences pay attention, regardless of the context in which they encounter it. As I prepared to close the office for the day, gathering my notes and turning off the desk lamp that had illuminated so many moments of professional decision-making, I found myself adding one more line to my private observations about the afternoon's most memorable audition. The kind of actor who improves everything he touches, I wrote, not through technique alone, but through the quality of attention he brings to the work. Someone who understands that acting is not about pretending to be someone else, but about finding the places where your own truth intersects with the character's truth. I locked the notebook in my desk drawer and gathered my coat, leaving the casting room in the gathering darkness of early evening. Tomorrow would bring another round of appointments, another stack of headshots, another series of professional judgments that would affect lives in ways both large and small. But tonight, driving home through the city lights, I carried with me the memory of those few minutes when someone had transformed a routine audition into something approaching revelation. And I knew that regardless of whether he booked this particular role, I'd witnessed something that would stay with me long after the details of 100 other auditions had faded. The rain had stopped completely by the time I reached my car, leaving the streets reflecting the glow of streetlights and pools of water that would evaporate by morning. But some impressions persist longer than puddles, and I knew that months from now, when I encountered this actor's name in industry publications or saw his face in a film or television show, I'd remember not just his exceptional audition, but the reminder it provided about the difference between mere competence and genuine artistry. In a business built on rapid judgments and immediate fits, he demonstrated the value of depth that reveals itself slowly, of truth that doesn't announce itself with fanfare, but simply exists, waiting for the right moment to be recognized and celebrated.